Some things disappear without making a sound like your name on a list you didn't know was being rewritten. I checked the email 4 times. First with my reading glasses, then without. Nothing in the inbox, nothing in spam. No quarterly board meeting invite, no agenda, no memo. For 37 years, it had always been automatic. The second Thursday of the quarter, 9:00 a.m., main conference room. I still wore the same pearl gray suit I'd worn to our first Series A meeting. The silk lining had worn thin under the arms, and one sleeve held a faint iron shine from too many presses. But it still fit. I arrived on time. The elevator stopped on the executive floor. I heard laughter through the glass before I saw their faces. Someone, a woman, bright, practiced, amused, said, "Today's going to be historic." I didn't recognize her voice at first. The door was shut. That wasn't unusual. The fact that the curtains had been drawn across the clear glass was. Through the slit between them, I saw all the department heads seated. The whiteboard was already filled with projections. The long table gleamed like it had just been polished. At the head sat Avery Langford, my son's wife. Now the CEO. I knocked 3 times. The kind of knock you'd use to remind someone you existed. The silence inside was immediate. She didn't get up. No one moved to open the door. I pushed it open myself. Avery didn't look at me. She just blinked once, like something unfamiliar had passed in front of her vision. "We're good here," she said, not addressing anyone in particular. No need for legacy oversight. I thought maybe she hadn't seen me clearly. Maybe I'd become a shape rather than a name. I stood still. No one gestured to a chair. No one slid a copy of the presentation toward me. Tom Ellison looked down at his phone. James Doyle gave me a brief, embarrassed glance, then turned it into a cough. Avery finally looked up. "Judith, we don't require input from departments that have transitioned out of operational relevance. Thanks for stopping in." Someone at the far end of the table stifled a laugh. Not unkind, just habitual. Like watching someone trip over a rug. She tilted her head slightly. "I hope you're not offended. We just need to move forward. Clean lines, no confusion about leadership." I don't remember if I nodded or not. I just remember how her voice had no edges, just a cool flatness like a screensaver. I closed the door behind me. Quietly. Because it's the habit of a lifetime to leave things neater than how you found them. That afternoon, I received a call from Nathan. My son. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask where I was. "Might be best if you stayed home for a while," he said. "It's just. Avery thinks your presence makes things complicated." He paused. "She's under pressure. The board's watching. Maybe take some time." I looked at the ring on my finger. My wedding band, now thin and dulled with time. I'd stopped wearing the engagement diamond years ago after a clasp broke, but I never took off the gold band. It had worn down to an oval, the underside almost paper thin. Nathan's voice was still in my ear, but I didn't hear words anymore, just tone, polite, distanced, like someone gently placing a photo face down. I found myself wiping the kitchen counter even though it was already clean. The movement helped. No one used the word founder, or mother, or even retired. They just let my name float in the pause after a sentence and hoped it would evaporate. That evening I sat at the dining table alone. Not out of drama, just habit. I'd always debriefed myself over chamomile tea and notes from the day. But now the notepad was blank, the pen still capped. The tea went cold. And still, no one had told me why the meeting happened without me. Later, I opened the side drawer of the cabinet, where I kept old office supplies. A binder clip, a cracked calculator, the fountain pen I used to sign our first investor packet. Buried beneath them, I found a folded name card, my original desk plate, from when I was still listed as COO. I turned it over in my hands. The gold trim had faded, and the lettering had curled slightly from age. I left it on the table, not as a monument, just to see what it looked like in the light. When my sister called later, I didn't mention what happened. I let her talk about her azaleas, the ones that bloomed too early, and the neighbor who borrowed hedge clippers and never returned them. "You've always been the practical one," she said. "You know when to step aside." I listened. I did not respond. Before bed, I opened the top drawer of my nightstand. Inside was the small silver watch my husband had given me on our 20th anniversary. It hadn't worked in years, but I never replaced the battery. I liked it frozen at 4:12 p.m. That was the time he used to come home from his second shift. The next morning, I didn't check the calendar. I didn't check the email. I just sat at the kitchen table, looking at the watch, the nameplate, and the blank notepad objects that no longer marked responsibility, just presence. Existence. No reply from Nathan. No follow-up from the company. I didn't expect one. I picked up the pen, not to write, just to feel the weight again. And when the clock ticked over to 9:00 a.m., I didn't stand. I chose not to knock. Not anymore. I used to think that compromise was a form of love proof, that something mattered enough to bend for it. When Nathan told me they wanted a garden wedding with a live quartet and a tent from that boutique rental firm in Connecticut, I said yes. Not because we had the budget, because Avery mentioned, half laughing, that a paper invitation in cursive script wouldn't exactly signal executive presence. I wired the money 2 days later discreetly. No one asked me to. No one thanked me either. She walked down the aisle under imported florals while the quartet played a slowed-down jazz arrangement of a pop song I didn't recognize. Someone at the table whispered, "This looks like a Vanity Fair spread." I folded my napkin over my lap and nodded. At the reception, she leaned in close, white silk, brushing my arm, and said, "Thank you for letting us elevate the day. I know it's not your usual style." Then she turned before I could reply. After the wedding, Nathan called the company lawyer to draft a name change proposal. "Langford Strategies," he said. "It sounds cleaner, more neutral, less generational." I opened the binder from our founding year, where the company seal was still embossed with our original initials, C&C, Campbell & Co. I ran my thumb along the raised edge before closing it. When they made the change official, I didn't fight it. I ordered new business cards, kept them in the drawer, never handed them out. I told myself that direction mattered more than signature. A week later, the Our Story page on the company site updated. My photo disappeared. The paragraph listing my name beneath founding leadership was gone. Not edited. Gone. I emailed the communications director. No reply. Avery passed me in the hallway that Friday and smiled. "It's more cohesive this way, brand-wise." She tapped her temple as if she'd just solved something I couldn't understand. I didn't bring it up again. They gave her the corner office. I moved 2 doors down. My new room didn't have windows, but I brought in a lamp with a soft amber glow. I still arrived before anyone else. I still reviewed every contract, every forecast. I still sent handwritten thank you notes to long-term clients at the end of each quarter. Avery began chairing executive meetings. She liked to stand while she spoke, walking slowly behind chairs, as if she were lining pieces up on a board. The first time she took my seat at the head of the table, she didn't look at me. No one said anything. I shifted to the far side and opened my notepad. She introduced a slide with the phrase, "A new vision free of legacy blind spots." I drew a line under that in my notebook. No comment. Just the date. My birthday came during the Q2 review. I didn't mention it. Neither did Nathan. At 10:49 p.m., I received a text from Avery. "Happy birthday. Hope it was restful." Restful. I turned off the phone and placed it in the drawer. Later that month, she revised our onboarding materials. She replaced my welcome letter with a one-page message from leadership in sans serif font. The closing line read, "Let's build forward, not backward." I wrote a brief comment in pencil on the draft. "Consider adding a warmer tone." I slipped it onto her desk before lunch. That afternoon, she caught me outside the elevator. "MBA protocol prefers direct messaging," she said, not unkindly. "Letters feel personal. That's not always strategic." She adjusted her watch as she spoke, a gold timepiece I didn't recognize. It was Nathan's anniversary gift to her. I had wrapped it for him. Of course I said. I didn't correct another document after that. At one team dinner, she introduced me to a new hire. As Nathan's mother, she used to be involved on the operations side. I nodded and smiled. The waiter placed a glass of Pinot Grigio in front of me. I drank it slowly. On the walk to the car, my shoes left small dents in the snow lining the curb. No one waited for me to catch up. When I got home, I took off my coat and saw a faint pink stain on the lining where an old pen had bled through. I ran my thumb over it thinking I should get it cleaned. I never did. Nathan stopped by one weekend in April, holding a bottle of olive oil and a paper bag of groceries. He moved through the kitchen like a guest, careful not to open the wrong drawer. "She means well," he said without context. I rinsed a spoon. "She's under pressure. Everyone's watching her. Sometimes it's easier if you just step aside a little." He didn't meet my eyes when he said that. I handed him a dish towel. He dried the plates. We didn't speak again for a while. After he left, I found the bag he brought still sitting by the back door. Inside were 2 lemons, a bundle of rosemary, and a receipt. On the bottom, Langford's Market. Not a coincidence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the sound of the neighbor's wind chimes, moving just slightly out of rhythm. I reached for the old sweater I kept at the end of the bed, blue with a worn elbow, and pulled it around me. The left sleeve still had a faint scent of dryer sheets from years ago. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I thought about the word strategy, how it sometimes means choosing silence over explanation, space over struggle. And I understood in that stillness that letting go wasn't something I did once. I had done it over and over, and no one ever noticed. I never noticed how easily a name can vanish until mine started disappearing from things I once touched. The holiday card last December came in a glossy envelope with raised gold lettering. I opened it carefully, using the dull side of a butter knife. The photo showed the entire family. Nathan in a navy suit, Avery in winter white, both children holding golden retrievers on leashes. Behind them, the company building stood like a monument, all glass and pride. I wasn't in the picture. Nathan said the shoot was done while I was out of town. I checked my calendar. That day, I had been in a conference room approving the employee health plan. "They thought you might not want to stand in the cold," he texted. There was no signature. A week later, the framed photo of our first signed contract was removed from the wall behind reception. In its place hung a new portrait of Avery speaking on a red-lit stage, her hands spread open mid-sentence. A small plaque underneath read, "Vision, Audacity, Legacy." Legacy. When Grace Holloway was promoted to Chief Financial Officer, the email said a new chapter in innovation. I forwarded it to Avery with a brief note, "She's done good work." The message bounced back. Later that afternoon, I stopped by Avery's office to congratulate her on the decision. She didn't look up. "We need someone fluent in digital metrics. Clients expect immediacy." She waved her hand slightly, as though brushing off static. "No offense, Judith, but no one wants financials explained by someone who uses printouts." I nodded. My fingers tightened around the manila folder I was holding. She picked up her phone before I left the room. A few days after that, I received an internal memo assigning me to archive optimization, a polite term for clearing out the file cabinets from the original boardroom. A footnote in the email explained the space will be converted into a think tank hub for cross-functional synergy. I boxed up documents I had once handwritten. I wiped dust from old policy drafts. I found a binder with my own annotations in red ink beside a faded coffee ring. Nobody asked if I wanted any of it back. One morning, I passed Grace in the corridor. She hesitated, her steps slowing just enough. "They're updating the About Us page again," she murmured. "I think they're streamlining the narrative. Might be worth checking." I nodded, though I didn't look it up. On the wall outside the executive lounge, there used to be a brass plaque listing the founding partners. My name had been fourth. Now there were only 3. During a quarterly offsite, the keynote speaker misquoted a historical merger. Avery corrected him on stage, laughing softly. "I know our company's origin story can be a little murky," she said. "That's what happens when history isn't documented properly." There were chuckles. I folded my napkin into a neat square and placed it under my glass. Grace once left a sticky note on my desk. It read, "They're rewriting history without you." I peeled it off slowly, folded it twice, and slipped it into my drawer next to an unused USB stick. One afternoon, I passed Avery's office. Her door was slightly open, a wedge of light falling across the floor. A man's voice, probably from marketing, asked something I couldn't hear. Avery answered, calm and amused. "She's not harmful, just outdated. Every company has a mascot. The issue is when the mascot forgets it's decorative." A silence followed. Then laughter, not cruel, just careless. I kept walking. Later that evening, I opened the bottom drawer in my kitchen and pulled out the corkscrew I hadn't used in years. The wooden handle had a crack in it. I turned it over in my hand and put it back. I had stopped hosting. Nathan once left a voicemail on a Tuesday. "Hey, just a heads up, we're doing a feature with Forbes next month. They'll want to know about the current exec structure. If anyone calls you, maybe just defer to Avery's version. Keeps things clean." He didn't mention the article again. When it came out, the write-up began. Avery Langford built Langford Strategies from the ground up, driven by grit, vision, and modern leadership values. There was no mention of the name Campbell, no founding date. No one asked for a correction. At the following board dinner, I arrived early. The name card at my usual seat had been replaced. I found a smaller card with my name printed in thinner font, placed at the end of the table near the server's station. I took the seat. Avery raised a toast midway through the meal. "To the women who paved the way," she said, smiling, "and to the ones who know when to pass the torch." Her glass clinked Nathan's. No one looked in my direction. I finished the meal. I folded my napkin. I left before dessert. Back home, I opened the drawer where I kept old photos and found a candid from the early days, Nathan sitting on the floor beside stacks of boxes labeled Client A, Contracts. He had been 10. In the corner of the photo, my handwriting, "First month. We survived." I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I stared at the note, faded now to a soft gray, and thought about survival, about how silence accumulates layer by layer until it becomes a kind of sediment. I placed the photo back in the drawer, closed it gently, and turned off the light. I used to believe that paper couldn't wound. The notice came by email, one line, "No greeting. Please vacate the vice president's office within 24 hours. Space will be repurposed as Innovation Hub." A square bullet point beneath it listed old furnishings may be discarded at the discretion of facilities. I read it twice. The subject line didn't even carry my name. When I stepped inside the office, the smell had changed. A new air diffuser hummed from the corner. something citrusy and sharp. My old chair was gone. In its place stood an ergonomic model I didn't recognize. Grace Holloway crouched near the file shelves, flipping through a stack of folders. She didn't look up. Beside her, Kelsey Monroe leaned against the desk, picking at the corner of her phone case. The light from her screen made her eyes seem smaller. "You don't have to worry about this," Kelsey said, not bothering to glance my way. "We're just clearing out the artifacts. Makes it easier to move forward." She reached into a gray trash bin and dropped a rolled-up photo inside without looking at it. Grace nudged a folder with her foot. "Some of this stuff's like museum level, like floppy disks, but emotionally." I didn't answer. On the floor beside the bin, I noticed the company's original articles of incorporation. My handwriting still marked the signature line. The ink had faded, but the loop of my last initial was still sharp. Folded beneath a stack of used paper cups was a photograph Nathan and I standing outside the first leased office, our shadows tall behind us. I had worn a tan blazer that day. He held a plastic sign that read, "Open for business." The edges of the photo were curled from heat. Someone had dropped coffee on the corner. It had dried in a perfect half circle. Near the base of the bin, I spotted the walnut plaque from the Chamber of Commerce, the one engraved with founding partner, Judith Campbell. It was half stuffed into a manila envelope labeled in blue ink, "Maybe keep for retro branding." I reached for it but stopped halfway. Grace turned to Kelsey. "Do you want to run this by Avery, or should I just dump the rest?" Kelsey waved her off. She said to be efficient. "Clean energy, clean history." Her words. The file cabinet drawers were open. A yellow sticky note clung to one handle, "Do not save." Outdated metrics and tone. I walked out. I didn't knock before entering Avery's office. The walls were bare except for a single neon acrylic sign behind her desk. "Future is female." She didn't look away from her screen. "You're still here." She clicked once. "I thought you understood what it meant to bow out gracefully." I stood still. The floor felt too flat under my shoes. "I didn't apply for a side role," I said. "I wrote the damn script." She laughed quietly, the way people do in meetings when they want others to feel small. "You're clinging to a brand no one buys anymore. Legacy isn't an asset if it slows velocity." Her hand moved toward a touch panel on the desk. The main monitor behind her flickered, then displayed a black and white internal alert. "Judith Campbell, terminated system, access revoked." She turned back to her screen. "Oh, and please don't take your mug. The one with your old signature on it." She gestured vaguely toward the shelf behind her. "It's off-brand. Sanitation said it smells like stale vanilla. Not exactly innovation material." Her fingers moved again across the touchpad. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the climate control. Her printer coughed once, then fell silent. I didn't speak. The mug had been a gift from Nathan. He had pressed it into my hands the day we landed our first 5-year contract. The ink had faded now, to the architect barely legible beneath the lip. I turned away. Outside the hallway stretched long and polished. My reflection followed me faintly along the glass. Nobody stopped me. Nobody looked. At the elevator, I paused. The badge clipped to my coat felt heavier than it had an hour ago. I unclipped it. The lanyard left a faint line on my collarbone. Avery had not stood. Not once. I thought about the first conference room table, how we'd sanded the edges ourselves so no one would snag their sleeves. We had picked wood that would scuff over time so it would remember us. That table had been sold 2 years ago to a law firm in Colorado. In the lobby, the receptionist avoided my eyes. Her screen showed a weather app. Rain was expected Thursday. I stepped outside without taking the mug. The wind tugged at my coat. I let it. My shoes tapped the sidewalk in even intervals. I passed the spot where we used to meet clients for coffee. Now it was a juice bar with a digital tip jar. I didn't look back. Some endings aren't about slamming doors or shouted words. Sometimes they arrive dressed in citrus air, holding folders labeled obsolete. And when they do, silence is not surrender. It's a refusal to explain. I reached into my coat pocket and felt the edge of an old index card. Years ago, I had written a quote from my father on it. "When they stop calling you by your name, write it on stone." I didn't take it out. I didn't need to read it again. They always said the safe was too old. The handle stuck, the lining cracked, the hinges creaked. But it never failed to protect what I placed inside. The file was still there, tucked between an old passport and the silver pen Nathan gave me when we signed our first client. I unfolded the founding trust slowly, the paper stiff with time corners, curled like pages that had waited too long to be turned. The ink held steady. My name. His. A date before Grace Holloway had even been born. I didn't reread the contents. I knew each clause by weight, the way one knows the seam of a scar after it heals over. I copied the document, placed it in a white envelope without sealing it. I used a fountain pen to write one line across the front. "If you plan to rewrite the past, be ready to bleach the blood out too." I left the envelope on the desk, next to the wooden bowl where I used to keep almonds and paper clips. No one called. Later that evening, I sent a single email. No images, no attachments, no signature. Just a subject line in bold goodbye, but not erased. And one line of text. "It is easy to build something. The harder part is keeping a soul inside it." I didn't wait to see if the message bounced. I placed the keys on a linen napkin, the badge on top. The mug last dented on one side with the cursive nameplate that had already started to flake off from too many hands that weren't mine. The note I left wasn't long. Just a sentence written with care. "Climb too high and it's not the fall that hurts, it's realizing no one was ever standing below." I folded it once, placed it inside the mug, and gently shut the lid of the box. The next morning, I left it with the front receptionist. She didn't ask what it was for, just nodded as though she'd been warned. No one tried to stop me. No alarms went off, no voices called from behind. That silence stayed with me longer than applause ever would have. At home, I placed my hands flat on the kitchen counter. The ceramic had a crack across the middle I'd never fixed. Every morning, coffee passed over it like it wasn't there. I suppose people do that too, with things with people. Later that night, a notification lit up my phone. "HR formally acknowledges your termination. All severance has been reviewed. Legal has no further inquiries. No name, just the line. No punctuation." I deleted it. At the bottom of my closet, I found the folder labeled Old Logos. Inside were sketches from the first year drawn in pencil. I hadn't opened it in nearly a decade. One draft had a coffee stain across the C. That was the one Nathan liked most. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I placed the folder in the back of the filing cabinet behind the appliance manuals and the unused checkbooks. I received a voicemail 2 days later. Grace's voice, hesitant, almost uncertain. "They're already removing your name from the boardroom plaque. Just thought you'd want to know." I didn't call back. The phone stayed face down on the table for the rest of the day. That week, I passed by the building once. Not on purpose, just muscle memory. I didn't slow down, but I noticed the new banner over the main door's Langford Strategies, where vision begins. The serif font tried too hard to look serious. I crossed the street before the light turned green. That Sunday, I received an invitation to the company's anniversary gala. The envelope was glossy, the calligraphy immaculate. Inside the card read, honoring the legacy of leadership innovation and future-facing success. There was no mention of my name, no return address, just a seat number and a dress code. Modern formal, I didn't RSVP. Instead, I cut the invitation down the middle and slipped the two halves into the back of the bookshelf between To Kill a Mockingbird and Good to Great. I spent the evening cleaning the silver letter opener that had lived on my desk for years. The tarnish didn't come off. I stopped trying. The day after Nathan's name appeared on my phone, no preview, just the name. I stared at it until it stopped ringing. Then another message, this time from Avery's assistant. Please return any archived documents or photos that may still be in your possession. We're undergoing a digital transition. I didn't answer. I opened the drawer where I kept a single Polaroid me and Nathan standing in front of the unfinished office wall, holding a sign that read, "Coming soon." I flipped it over. On the back, he had written, "Let's never forget why we started." I slid it under the cut invitation. I thought about mailing it to them anonymously. Then I didn't. That evening, I baked cornbread. The same recipe I used the week the company was founded, when the only celebratory thing we could afford was lunch in the break room. I didn't burn it this time. I wrapped half in parchment, left it on my neighbor's porch. I kept the rest. Somewhere between the last bite and the last dish, I realized they could have deleted my name from the website, the photo wall, the letterheads, but I had written the foundation in ink they couldn't reach. I folded the dish towel, turned off the kitchen light, and stood a moment longer than I needed to. Some endings don't need grief, just precision. I never needed a title to wake up early. I rose at the same hour as always, even when there was no calendar to consult. My hands moved without prompting. Boil water, steep tea, wipe the counter that no one else would touch. The chipped teacup with the faded bird print still sat by the window. Its wing had worn off from years in the dishwasher. I used to drink from it in the corner office. Now here. No one called this place mine. The deed still listed my husband's name. He brought me here once long ago during a week we weren't quite sure what we were running from. The dock's edge creaked the same way it did then. I didn't test it. Some things are better held in the mind's weight, not the body's. I found the old photo frame buried beneath dish towels. Not a single speck of dust had dared land on his face. I cleaned the glass anyway. I hung it without measuring, no level, no nails, just a tack from the back drawer, and a small conviction that some memories didn't need symmetry to hold. There were no deliveries, no phone calls asking for clarification, no updates to review. My name had vanished from the glass board in the lobby, from the welcome packet from the morning briefings. Not even a legal notice arrived. Just the absence of follow-up, the kind that says it's done. Move on. Still, I checked my phone once a day out of muscle rather than hope. On Tuesday, it buzzed. The name blinking was one I had not expected. Ms. Judith Urgent. A client just posted on LinkedIn. Public. Accusing Avery of fraud. He altered terms post-signature. Screenshots attached. Legal is panicking. I placed the phone face down on the side table. It did not buzz again for several minutes. When it did, it was an email, Judith. I was wrong. I should have spoken up. If you need someone to testify, I will. Tom E. He used to avoid my eyes in elevators. I left both messages unread. 3 days later, headlines began stacking. Langford Strategies, CEO, implicated in contractual misrepresentation. Clients claim deliberate alteration of investment terms. Exclusive audio. I'm not running this past Judith, she's in a forest somewhere. The reporter quoted an unnamed associate. There were whispered instructions to re-export PDFs before the audit. Timestamp edits. Internal flags disabled. Avery's voice was in the audio. I didn't need to press play. The quote alone sufficed. I returned to my chair and opened the cloth-bound notebook I had not touched since moving. Its spine cracked softly. On the first page beneath my husband's handwriting, I wrote, "A house built on false balance crumbles not from storms, but from its own weight." I turned the page and left it blank. The fireplace still worked. I never used it. I preferred the hum of the kettle and the dry whisper of paper against my palm. Each morning, I swept the porch. There were no visitors, no footsteps, only the occasional mark of a squirrel or a wind-blown leaf that stuck to the plank. I didn't brush those away too fast. A small wooden box sat by the bookshelf. I hadn't opened it since the day I left. Inside one folder, cream-colored with a blue ribbon tying it shut. The ink on the label had faded, but the name was unmistakable. Campbell Founding Trust. Third page, a line in italic. In the event of ethical breach by executive leadership, founding party retains review rights to internal governance structure. I closed it without highlighting anything. Some sentences don't need witnesses to stay true. Later, I poured more tea. The water spilled slightly on the counter. I wiped it with the same cloth I had used to clean the photo frame. The steam from the cup clouded my glasses. My phone lit up again. A group message this time. "We just want peace now. Let things lie. Please don't make this worse." The sender was Avery's assistant. Not him. I hadn't heard directly from him since the week I was told flatly, "We're moving in a new direction." No subject line, no signature block, just that. Once in a meeting, my father leaned over my shoulder and whispered, "Don't be sentimental. Business doesn't remember names, only outcomes." He died with 6 patents to his name and no funeral eulogy longer than 3 lines. I reread the assistant's message. I didn't respond. I archived it and unplugged the phone from its charger. A moth fluttered against the glass. I watched it beat itself quiet. The kettle clicked off again. I turned the Campbell folder face down. The old wall clock kept ticking. Somewhere far away, an empire began to crack in silence. I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to. I was already home. I used to think silence meant the end of something. Now I know it can be the start. He didn't knock. The sound of tires on gravel was enough. I kept sweeping until the bristles caught on a stone. Nathan stood by the gate, one hand in his coat pocket, the other dangling keys like an afterthought. "You still wake up this early?" His collar was crooked. I thought maybe the lake would slow you down. I waited. "Avery's been put on pause," he muttered, not quite looking at me. "Legal's crawling through everything now. It's not great." I leaned the broom against the porch rail. "They think bringing you back could help," he went on. "Not officially. Maybe just as an advisor." I tilted my head slightly. Not confusion, just curiosity contained. "They're saying if you don't show face, the midline contract is gone. And once that's gone..." He let the sentence trail like smoke from a dying match. I said nothing. "I'm not here for Avery." He tried again. "I'm here because we need the name. Campbell still carries weight." His voice dropped on that last word. Weight. Not grace. Not legacy. Just leverage. I didn't invite him in. I didn't mention the mug on the porch table, the one with a chipped rim and initials faded by time. He used to bring me tea in it when he was 12. He didn't bring it up either. 2 days passed. I had almost forgotten the way Avery writes my name. Small letters too close together, always leaning left, like they're afraid of standing straight. The envelope came with no return address, no stamp. Just placed carefully in the mailbox, as if delivered by someone who wanted to be both seen and untraceable. Inside one note, one USB. "If you're satisfied, I suppose this is it," the letter read. "You always wanted to be the last decent one standing, but decency doesn't protect a company. It doesn't protect your son. It barely protects a lakeside chair. No signature, just that line." I ran my thumb along the edge of the paper until it bent. Grace's name lit up my phone later that week. "They're restructuring the archive. Any files with your signature are marked temporarily invalid." She paused. "But some partners, they're asking for the original founder to make a statement. Not because they care, because it's safer." The kettle clicked off before she finished. I let it cool. "They're not looking for your return," she added. "They're looking for a shield." I wrote her number on the back of an old library card and slipped it between the pages of a worn notebook, the kind with margins filled by someone I used to be. There was no ceremony. I put the file box in the passenger seat and drove without music. I didn't stop by the office. I passed it slowly, windows blank and faceless. I parked 3 blocks from the federal financial office. They didn't ask for an appointment. They asked for a name. I gave them mine. Just that. The woman behind the glass slid a clipboard toward me. I signed without hesitation, the way I had signed leases, trust documents, and once a hospital waiver when no one else could bear to. They took the USB. They took the original trust agreement with the clause "still intact" on page 3. In cases of ethical breach, the founder may re-enter governance solely to facilitate external review. No one stopped me when I walked out. No one thanked me either. I didn't expect them to. Back at the lake, the air held still. The kind of stillness that doesn't demand attention, only offers it. I folded the coat I wore into the bottom drawer. I hadn't worn it since the night my husband died. The lining still carried a scent that didn't belong to the present. On the table, I laid out the last 3 things I had kept from the office: a pen that never ran dry, a brass key with no label, and a page torn from an old notebook. His handwriting, a single line: "If the floor gives way, dig." I stared at that sentence longer than I meant to. The next morning, another envelope arrived. This one from the internal firm counsel, postmarked but unsigned. A copy of a revised board proposal was inside. My name appeared once, not under chair, not even under advisor. Just Campbell Historical. They hadn't erased me. They had reduced me. And yet, the sun reached the top of the trees by then. I brought out the same chair, turned it slightly to the left where the light fell unevenly. I didn't sit. I set the letter beneath one of the potted plants. The roots would find it eventually. I poured tea into the chipped mug and placed it on the railing. The steam curled toward the sky, then vanished. When I picked up my journal again, I didn't write names. I wrote shapes: a square, a circle, a line. Then I stopped. Not because there was nothing left to say, because some things are only meant to be known, not written. I never thought a folded napkin could tell me more than any voice. The paper was cream-colored, printed with the cafe's logo in green. I unfolded it twice before setting it aside untouched. Across the table, she stirred her tea with a motion too careful to be unconscious. "You look smaller in real life," she murmured. I traced the rim of my cup with a fingertip. The porcelain was chipped at the edge. Not sharp, just unfinished. Like things meant to break, but never quite did. "I expected more silver hair," she added, then paused. "Nathan doesn't sleep much. Keeps saying it wasn't supposed to happen this way." I let the spoon rest on its saucer. She waited. "He thought losing the company would feel like grief," she continued. "But it feels like getting out of something. Heavy." There was a crease at the bottom of her sleeve like she had rushed dressing. A lipstick mark faint on the edge of her glass. I counted the details without needing them. I hadn't come to reclaim a son. I had come for the silence that came after. "I'm not here to blame," I said quietly, "or to offer relief, just coffee." She nodded once, and we didn't speak again until she left. I watched her reflection in the window shrink beside the moving cars. The napkin remained. I keep it now inside a book I don't reread. At home, I write under a name no one at Langford ever said aloud. JC. The initials feel clean. My hands move easily across the keyboard typing, how to keep your name on what you built, even if they try to bury it under new signs. The blog has no photograph, just words and a discreet green icon. Grace once called it the sharpest ghost in the room. Last month, the business editor offered me a column. She called it a redemption arc. I declined the title. "It's not redemption," I told her. "It's record correction." She didn't argue. An envelope arrived from Nathan the day after it rained. The outer label was blank, the address handwritten. Inside one page. "I know you probably don't want to hear this." The message began. "But I'm trying to learn how to tell the truth without expecting forgiveness. I let someone else rewrite what you gave your life to build. I'm not proud, but I won't let them erase you in the next chapter. No return address. I didn't need one." The font he used in the signature was still Calibri, like all his old memos. That night, I didn't light the fireplace. I sat in the quiet, holding the letter flat on my lap with both hands. The next week, I received a brown package with no note inside, just a file folder and a small yellow slip clipped to the front. I recognized the handwriting before reading the words. "Here, all yours. I don't need it anymore," it read. Then beneath it smaller, "I never needed the company." No punctuation. Avery never liked finishing sentences. Inside the folder, legal documents, transfer of ownership, full relinquishment of shares, signed, notarized. His name scratched in a bold stroke that looked more like a brand than a signature. The USB key was still taped to the back cover. The same one he'd sent anonymously weeks before, this time without theatrics. I flipped the papers once. Then again, I touched the edge of the folder with a kind of detachment, like closing a drawer you forgot was still open. I didn't call anyone. The next morning, I made tea in a mug with a faint hairline crack. It didn't leak, just held the heat a little unevenly. I didn't fix it. At noon, Grace called. "They're reassembling the leadership chart. Legal's cleared most of the mess, but they're looking for a name the press won't chew on." I let her continue. "Investors don't want a Campbell out of guilt. They want the illusion of continuity. Something that looks like integrity." I folded the tea towel on the counter. She kept going. "Come back if you want. But just so you know, it won't be gratitude that greets you. It'll be fear of falling share prices." I thanked her and didn't write the date down. Later, I found myself outside brushing ash from the old porch table. I paused when I noticed a stain shaped like a map. It hadn't been there last week. I ran a finger across it. The grain of the wood held it firmly. I thought of a time when my name hung above a glass wall in gold lettering. How people used to lower their voices when I walked in. Now strangers read my work without ever knowing it came from the same hand. Nathan's email. Avery's envelope. Grace's call. All pieces in a puzzle they built when they believed I wouldn't be watching. I picked up the envelope again, the one Avery had sent, and ran my thumb across the line he had written, "I never needed the company." A sentence like that tries to wound but misses the heart. I whispered back to the air, "Good, because it never needed you." The mug beside me had cooled. The crack in it now felt less like a flaw and more like a seam, a place where heat escapes but doesn't disappear. There are people who believe closure comes in courtrooms or apologies, but sometimes it just arrives in silence. Some choices aren't loud. They don't echo. They barely make a sound at all. The folder in my hand had started to soften at the corners. I'd held it too long in the crook of my arm. A dry edge curled slightly where my thumb pressed down. It wasn't heavy, but it had weight in the way a final word does when spoken too late. Across the desk, the notary adjusted her glasses. Her tone wasn't curious, just cautious. Once you sign, your name is no longer affiliated, not as co-founder, not as board member. Are you certain? I moved the pen across the page. One signature, one line. My maiden name, not the one printed on brochures, awards, legal memos, or the glass door of Suite 1203. I was erased once without being asked, I said. This time, I'm doing the erasing myself. She hesitated, then stamped it. The thud of the seal felt final in a way words couldn't match. I didn't linger. I folded the copy and walked out. The handle of the door was cold, brushed metal round like the kind I'd insisted on when we designed the offices 15 years ago. Avery had wanted something more modern. This feels old, she had said, tapping one mock-up, like it belongs to someone who still uses checks. I had smiled then. I didn't smile now. The drive home was quiet. My phone buzzed once. A notification, not a message. I didn't check it. Back at the lake house, I laid the folder on the kitchen table next to a chipped ceramic bowl I never got around to replacing. I reached into the drawer where I had kept the USB. It was still there, black and small, the kind of device meant to be forgotten until needed. Its edges had dulled against the wooden dividers. I never plugged it in. I walked to the fireplace and opened the grate. The coals were still faintly red from the morning's heat. I placed the USB inside. No hesitation, no ceremony. There was no smell, no sound, no sudden burst of smoke, just the quiet reduction of something once full of secrets into something that no longer mattered. The ring on my hand turned slightly as I reached to close the grate. It caught the firelight for a second. I remembered when it used to be polished weekly, not because I cared, but because I was still expected to be seen. On the table near the window sat a stack of stationery I'd bought from a woman at the farmer's market. Thick paper, no lines. I took a sheet and wrote without greeting or title. I built something. Then I watched it fracture. Then I was removed. My name, my imprint, my part in the story vanished in redline edits and rewritten credits. They thought I would fight to reclaim it. They expected me to linger like a ghost pacing the empty halls I once paid for. Instead, I signed it away. I chose the silence they thought would break me. But silence doesn't always mean surrender. If anyone ever asks me what I did with my life, I will say I founded. I was betrayed. I was erased. And then I was the one who locked the last door. Not to keep anyone out, just to walk away. I folded the letter and placed it inside a plain envelope. No address. I set it beside the bowl on the counter. Not for mailing, not for anyone else. Just something to hold the last sentence of a chapter. The wind shifted outside. I didn't get up. Earlier at the notary office, a man I didn't know had brushed past me on his way out. He wore a navy windbreaker with a company logo stitched in white thread. Langford, it read. I doubt he noticed me. I doubt he knew the name had once been mine in every way that mattered. Years ago, during a meeting with investors, one of them had leaned back, arms folded, and looked at me like I was the anomaly. "You're the founder? I thought you were the office manager. You have that vibe." Avery had laughed. "She just likes control," she said. "That's her thing." That sentence followed me longer than I admitted. Not for what it said, but for how no one challenged it. Now there was nothing left to control. No boards, no shares, no advisory roles in name only. Just my name on paper, where I'd placed it for the final time. The fireplace crackled softly. I didn't feed it. I glanced at my hands. The veins were more visible now, the skin thinner than it used to be, But the grip around the pen hours earlier had been steady. No tremor, no pause. I remembered once signing a contract on the hood of a car in the rain because a client insisted we didn't need a formal meeting. Back then, my name had meant something. Or maybe I only thought it did because people needed me. It's easier to confuse usefulness with worth when you're young. Nathan hadn't called since the email. The one that read, "I let others rewrite your story. I thought I was making space, but now I know I was making you disappear." He hadn't asked for forgiveness. He hadn't earned it. But I kept the message. Not because it mended anything, but because it didn't try to. Avery's name hadn't appeared in weeks. Not in emails, not in headlines, not even in whispers. She had exited the stage as she always said she would, on her own terms. But I had no interest in the terms anymore, just in the exit. The envelope on the table sat still. I didn't seal it. I didn't label it. Some endings don't need to be sent. They just need to be written. I used to think silence was something to be endured. The kettle rattled once before settling into a low whisper. I poured the water into the moss-green mug I'd glazed myself, its rim slightly uneven, where my thumb had slipped. The tea darkened in swirls. There was no rush, no red-flagged messages blinking, no calendar reminders, no Mrs. Campbell in the subject line of anything. I picked up the ceramic lid from the windowsill, where it had cooled overnight. The glaze had cracked faintly along the edge like lines around a closed mouth. It wasn't perfect. It was mine. A knock, not at the door, but across the path. Sarah Coleman waved one gloved hand and held a wriggling toddler with the other. The second child had found a pine cone and was turning it over like a puzzle. She smiled without expectation. "You're writing again. Not writing. Recording, so I don't forget. I was here." She tucked a folded note into my palm. "Dinner at Nathan's next Thursday. Just us. No business. Just wine and my failed attempt at pie." I handed the note back. "I'll come. But the pie has to fail without me." There was no need for more. She nodded, and the pine cone was surrendered with minimal fuss. Inside, the floor creaked under my heel. I opened the drawer that once held board minutes and financial ledgers. There, beneath an old map of the Adirondacks, was a single silver cufflink. Its match had been lost years ago during the move from our first home. It had been a gift. 1984, the year we signed our first mortgage. The engraving had worn smooth. I took it to the man who sold wedding bands and mended lockets. I slid it across the counter. "No gem." He looked up. "No need." He measured in silence, tapping once on the inside rim of the mold. When I returned 3 days later, he handed me a ring, plain silver. On the inside, still here, still mine. That night, I read an email twice before closing it without response. A small press in Vermont wanted to adapt my ledgers into a memoir. "Leadership in the Shadows," the subject line read. I left it marked unread. Maybe I would reply. Maybe not. For the first time, I didn't need to be remembered in print to be real. Later that week, I found a note in the mailbox with no envelope. It smelled faintly of cologne I recognized. The writing was familiar, a little hurried. It said, "I heard you stepped back. Maybe next time you'll think of the family before walking away." No signature. Just the ink pressed harder than necessary. I folded it once, then again, and used it to prop up the back leg of the uneven table on the porch. It balanced perfectly. At the co-op, while browsing a shelf of hand-stitched cloths, I heard a voice behind me. "I thought you were dead." I turned. Miriam, once my sister-in-law, didn't bother smiling. "Funny," I said, "I heard the same about you." She adjusted her purse strap. "You always did like making exits loud enough to echo. Better that than staying too long in someone else's script." She tilted her head, then leaned in. "Legacy doesn't wait forever, Judith. it picks someone else. I paid for the cloth and didn't look back. That evening, I sat by the fire with a book I hadn't opened in years. The margins still bore notes in pencil, not mine. I traced one line with my finger. Let them say what they will. I am still the author. The graphite had faded, but not disappeared. On a whim, I retrieved an old letter from the drawer beside my bed. It was one I'd never mailed. The seal was unbroken. On the front, to the one who thought power was enough. I unfolded it, skimmed the ink, and tucked it between the last pages of my notebook. I didn't need to send it. The words had already done their work. On the morning of the eclipse, I didn't tell anyone I would be watching. I brought my chair outside, set the ring on the table beside me, and waited. The light shifted, thinned, then bowed. I sipped my tea slowly, the heat warming the cracks in the glaze. A bird landed nearby, but didn't sing. It didn't need to. That afternoon, a young woman at the library handed me a printed card with a quote by someone I no longer remembered admiring. She looked down. "You were the one who led the Langford sessions, right?" "My mother always quoted you." I returned the card. She must have misquoted. She blinked, uncertain whether it was a joke. Before leaving, I borrowed a book on pottery. Not the kind with color photos or how-tos, but one that spoke about the philosophy of clay. The kind of book someone once told me was a waste of time. At home, I placed the book on the kitchen table and boiled water again, this time, not for tea, but to soften the wax on an old candle. As it melted, I dipped my finger in and pressed it into the spine of the ring box, sealing it shut. Later, I sat with a letter in my lap, not addressed, not intended to be. Dear Avery, you do not need to return. I do not need your apology. But if there ever comes a morning where the things you hold feel weightless and dull, I hope you remember. Fulfillment isn't in holding on. It's in knowing when something no longer belongs in your hands. I folded it slowly. No seal this time. I tucked it between the pages of the pottery book where no one was likely to look. Then I lit the small candle beside me. The flame didn't flicker. It just held steady. I used to think I needed to keep my place in other people's lives to stay real. Now I know whoever remembers themselves fully can never be erased.